Gatekeeper, open the portals between the gods and mortals. Power freely flows as our magic grows.
Blessed Hestia, whose power extends over altars and hearth fires. It is your flame that keeps our prayers and sacrifices sacred to the gods. Blessed Hestia, enter the space. You are welcomed here. Accept our offering.
Hey, I'm Arin.
And I'm Jonathan.
And you're listening to Part the Mist,
a podcast by a pair of ADF druids here in Portland, Oregon. Our deity for this episode is Hestia. Hestia was the virgin goddess of the hearth, both private and civic. As the goddess of the family hearth, she also presided over the cooking of the bread and the preparation of the family meal. Hestia was also the goddess of sacrificial flame and received a share of every sacrifice to the gods. The cooking of the communal feast of the sacrificial meat was naturally a part of her domain. She was the firstborn child of Kronos and Rhea and was swallowed by her father at birth. Zeus later forced the old titan to disgorge Hestia and her siblings. So this is a little bit about who Hestia is. Unfortunately, Arin can't make it to today's recordings due to illness, but sit back and enjoy our discussion with members of the ADF Hellenic kin.
So we are here today to talk, we're going to talk a little bit about the Hellenic Hearth culture, and Jonathan and I have asked a few members of the ADF Hellenic kin to join us. So we have with us today Reverend Rob Henderson, Thexalon Dave Kleinschmidt, and Diane Emerald Brunswick Egelhoff. And I hope I said all your names correctly.
Bronowitz, but that's close.
Oh, Bronowitz, okay. So why don't you guys let us know what it is that you do in the kin?
Should I start?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Rob?
Okay, this is Rob. I am currently the Basileus of the White Owls, so that means I'm in charge of the whole thing, which doesn't mean a super amount for a kin that's spread out all over the world and only occasionally manages to meet together at festivals. I try to keep some amount of conversation going on our mailing list, since I keep arguing about how Facebook has been destroying our conversation and putting it in the hands of a corporation. I want to light a single candle rather than curse the darkness, so I try to keep things about semi-active on the list. I don't want it to be a burden, but I try to post interesting things that I find about ancient Greek culture and new discoveries. And my current remaining project, I have 1 year left in term, and my big project I hope to work on is to get as many of us as possible to Nashville next August, so we can watch the total eclipse of the sun from the Parthenon Park there in Nashville and visit the Parthenon on the same day. That's my goal. That's my one remaining goal for the rest of my term.
Sweet.
That'd be awesome. I'm hoping to take it. I guess I'll go next. I'm Diane Emerald Bronovich Egelhoff, or Bronowitz, whichever. Sorry, sometimes I use the Slavic pronunciation. Anyway, I have been around ADF since the early 2000s, and I used to be the Basileus of the kin for a while. I've been scribe, and I'm currently a member of our Aeropagus, which is sort of just an advisory board. And a lot of what I've done in ADF in terms of Hellenic stuff is I really did a lot of work on bringing authentic Greek practice in line with ADF practice. There were a lot of rituals, I think, that were done in earlier days that looked pretty Greek recon, which is, fine, but isn't necessarily ADF. So I did a lot of work and a lot of proselytizing too. I did some workshops at festivals trying to get people to remember that we do have Hellenes in ADF, and then to show people how you can practice in an ADF context, but still in a Hellenic way that still resonates with what we know about the past, because in the Hellenic stuff, we know so much. So, unlike some of the other hearth cultures. So, taking that and still bringing it into line with ADF practice and taking the important and good things about ADF and, bringing in the authentic practice as well. So that's a lot of what I did a lot to start getting us in meeting face to face. We did a lot of we did rituals at Wellspring, and we did the first Hellenic retreat in Columbus, and it was great. So I just trying to make us feel a little bit more like we're an actual community within ADF, just because we were always so few of us for such a long time. We felt like we were very much the outsiders, and now I think we're the third largest kin. So there's been a lot of growth just since I've been around, and I think it's really, really wonderful.
So I guess I'm up next. I'm Thexalon Dave Kleinschmidt. I currently serve as the Polemarkhos, which is the secretary of the White Owl's kin, which means mostly I maintain membership rosters and manage officer elections. But my other sort of work in the kin has been starting and continuing to run the annual symposium, which is not as formal as it might sound. A lot of wine is consumed.
The symposium is it doesn't really sound formal at all.
Yeah, well, for Hellenes it doesn't, but for people who are used to academic symposia, it's a different story. So I've been doing a lot of that. I've been also have a particular interest in putting more of the language and music and just the sound of Hellenic culture back into what we're doing in modern paganism and ADF in particular. So that's really been my focus. I also locally am Secretary of the Grove and just doing work and making sure that some Hellenic rituals are happening on a regular basis.
Awesome. So before we jump into a little bit more into what the Hellenic Hearth culture is, I'm curious, what is the symposium besides drinking wine?
It is basically wine and conversation, and occasionally we will dive into philosophy topics, although sometimes we've done a lot of storytelling, which turns into drinking games.
Yes, storytelling with drinking games.
Yes, it is. It is, in fact... That is based very heavily on actual Hellenic social practices. Now, the big difference is we include women in our conversation, which ancient Hellenes usually didn't. But
they included at the symposium, but they had a very specific role.
Yeah,
we weren't just get some prostitutes there, but you never hire the prostitutes, did you? Thanks.
No, I never did.
Women are actually talking and contributing. We're not just playing the flute and dancing for you guys. So
yeah, exactly. We do.
I wouldn't mind having some people play the flute and dance if they wanted to, but
yeah. This is part of. I always consider ADF to be the reformed Druids of North America. So we've had 2 rounds of Reformation, and we've pretty much gotten rid of the whole sexism thing.
We're working on it.
On it.
At least formally.
Yes,
formally. Come and play the flute together too. I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind some flute boys or flute girls.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There we go.
All right. Sounds like a lot of fun. So why don't you tell us a little bit, let's start with kind of the history of the Hellenic hearth culture. Or unless you got, I know, Rob, you said you had a kind of an outline. If there's somewhere else you wanted to start.
No, Thanks said that.
Thanks.
I'm
sorry.
So, and I'm going to give the very, very brief overview because it's a culture that was around and was influential for probably reasonably could say a couple thousand years, of which about 1,000 of that they were known to be pagans in something vaguely related to what we're focused on. So we get Minoan civilization around, I want to say 1200 BCE, somewhere in that ballpark. Rob, please feel free to correct me on any of that.
I think it's more like 1700, if I remember.
1700 BCE. Yep. See, this is why I want you around. And this is going to slowly develop along with heavy influence from Indo-European invaders from the north into what we would consider something vaguely resembling the Hellenic culture you're going to see Homer. So first Greek writing that we have some Linear A and Linear B. Linear A we still don't know much about. Linear B, we have some deciphering of it. We get a little bit of literacy. When you get Homer around 800 or so BCE, we start getting actual literature, and Hestia at around the same period. And that allows us really a very clear window into how are these people thinking. Homer becomes sort of... there are a lot of times where you see the Iliad treated in that culture much like the Iliad being one of Homer's two great epics. The Iliad is often almost quoted the same way that modern Christians might quote the Bible in later debates and discussions and things. So you can sort of see that as the roots of Hellenic religion. The Hellenes, the Greeks, are going to continue. They're right now at this point early on, they remain as separate city-states, and that's going to be important. The Athenians and the Spartans and the Thebans and Corinthians are all different cultures. They're related, they're next to each other, but they are also fighting each other on a regular basis. So, and they do things differently. By the time you get to closer to, I want to say 400 BCE, somewhere in that ballpark, you have Philip of Macedon and then Alexander the Great will unify Greece in a way that has never happened before, politically speaking, and expand Hellenic culture pretty heavily eastward and southward into places like Alexandria, into the Middle East, and as far out as India. At that point, now every time they travel, of course, they're going to mix with the local culture, so it's not like all of those places become Greek-dominated, and you're not seeing that many temples to Greek gods out in the Far East, but there is some influence there. Once you get to Roman times, the Romans conquered them. I'm trying to remember, Rob, or Emerald, you might know when Roman control actually took over, politically speaking, for the Hellenic.
Around 100 to 150 BCE. Alexander before that, but then the Romans came through around that time.
Yeah. So the Romans would come in. They become politically Roman, but culturally Greek, and the eastern half of the Mediterranean is culturally Greek and remains culturally Greek until after the Roman Empire has gone, and as the Byzantine Empire. Now, officially speaking, the Hellenic culture would stop being pagan when around 300 CE, which would be when the Roman Empire is converting. There's still a unified empire. And of course, that doesn't mean that necessarily Greek religion, pagan Greek religion, had stopped unofficially, but officially that was the end of it. So we've got a period of about 800 BCE to about 300 CE of active Hellenic pagan worship as we might recognize it today.
And that can be kind of overwhelming for somebody starting out, really. But thinking about what we really do, I mean, what I try to let people know is that Greece was not a monolithic political unit. It wasn't a monolithic culture. You know, each city-state, each little town each colony had its own local cults and practices. And even though there were some religious, things that were common across the Greek world, but really a lot of what we know and a lot of what we draw from, especially in ADF, comes from sort of the 5th century classical period, and a lot of what we know and a lot of what we do comes from Athens. So a lot of times we're working pretty much with we're pulling from Athenian religious culture. A lot in ADF practice. It's just kind of a narrow time period, but it's the time that sort of everything sort of really flourished it, and we know the most about. So, yeah, it's just Greek religion. It's a very sort of large thing, and like Thex said, it happened over a very long period of time.
And 5th century BCE is also before a lot of the influences that we might think are less pagan start to pop up, like Aristotle's writings, the whole four element concept. The gods aren't really a thing; they're more metaphors that didn't match up with what the people beforehand would have thought. It's still Greek-ish, certainly, but if you're looking as a neo-pagan at ways to do modern pagan rites, that doesn't quite match up with what came before it, I would argue.
Exactly. We're not really talking like hard polytheism anymore, like we work with in ADF context.
Yeah. I would mention that those philosophical writings in Aristotle in particular remains incredibly influential among neo-paganism in general, even though a lot of neo-pagans aren't aware of it. Sure. One thought to be aware of is that the link from Aristotle to modern paganism goes from the writings getting preserved by the Muslims for about 1,000 years, while the Christians are not doing much to preserve any of the Greek thought. Comes back during the Renaissance. From there, you're going to have a revival and interest in Greek thought, but they're then trying to unify that Christian thought. You get interest in that once you start looking at academics interested in ceremonial magic, and it makes its way from there into Wicca and similar sorts of practices. So it's a convoluted history.
Yeah.
Well, isn't all history?
Indeed. Oh, I just want to say one of the things I like about practicing Hellenic ADF specifically, because I belong to Hellenian as well, which is a Greek Reconstructionist group, organization, church, and I do a lot more just straight up recon stuff at my personal hearth. But one of the things I like about working with ancient Greek culture in an ADF context is that ADF just has such a vibrant ritual structure, and there's a lot to pull from in ancient Greek practice that we can match up very well with the greater Indo-European cosmology, and I think that it works very well. Even the fire and the well and the sacred center are it's all there in ancient religion.
And actually, the one very specific Hellenic practice that I am really glad is very much a part of ADF ritual is procession. The ritual starts by traveling through the village and saying, "Hey, everybody, we're going to worship and do some sacrifices now." That's very much the Hellenic thing.
You know what? I think that maybe I might have an easier time with the fact that I have to drive all of my ritual gear to the ritual site every single time if I think of it in that way. Like, okay, let's get in the car. It's time to process to the ritual site. That might actually help my sanity some.
Right. I mean, well, the good news is you're not doing like the Eleusinian Mystery 20-mile procession on foot kind of deal.
Yeah, you have to mean it there. Your listeners might actually look up Labyrinth. It's a Greek Reconstructionist group, and they have videos of a lot of their stuff online, including processionals they actually do through the town, not just through their campsite. They're going to an actual city that people live in, not all the members of Labyrinth, and they are still doing the Pompeii, the processional through the middle of the town, chanting and wearing their robes, and everyone watches, and it's fascinating to watch.
If you can...
the background in...
So, what does Hellenic ADF practice look like?
Well, there are a few things that are going to really stand out. And I don't know. I mean, I think that the procession is pretty common in ADF, but not in all places. In my grove, sometimes we process, sometimes we don't. If we're doing Greek, we definitely process. I love there's specific ways of purifying in Greek religion. It's very, very important to have ritual cleanliness, to be free of what the Greeks would call miasma or any like ick. That would be, their spiritual or, being spiritually clean and being physically clean was very important. So we take some extra steps with purification when we do Hellenic rituals, maybe washing your face and hands at the very least, even when we do, grove rites. Everyone seems to like the throwing of the barley, which is part of the purification. I've sort of linked that with the outsiders. It's basically we take a handful of barley and then throw it at the fire and at the offerings and at the altar to purify them. So I think that kind of actually works pretty well with the outsiders thing. Do you guys do that when you guys do Greek stuff?
What I did is actually something pulled from some of the research I did on the Asproi Mysteries. What we actually did is put grain in a basket that's not completely sealed and shake it over the heads of those who are present to bring that. So you're actually dropping it a little bit. You're shaking it onto your group of ritualists, but so you definitely notice that. Some other differences I think we're bringing up. The big difference I think is that we put a bigger emphasis on stones like the omphalos rather than a sacred tree symbol.
Yeah, that's when I first started doing my personal Hellenic rites, and I was trying to figure out what are we going to do about a tree, And I mean, it's to me that we call it the omphalos, the sacred stone that sat at Delphi, the navel of the world that marked the sacred center of the world. It's also cool because it's also the same. It's said to be the same stone that Hera, not Hera, that Rhea had given to Kronos instead of Zeus, and then he threw it back up with the rest of the Olympians. So that. And then there's a thing about Zeus sent his eagles out to find the center of the world, and it was there at Delphi, and that stone marks the center of the world. And when we think about in ADF, what does a sacred tree do? It marks the center of the world. So that was something I started doing and got a lot of the Hellenes on board with that. Some people were working with a mountain, maybe Olympus could be a sacred center. I just kind of that the omphalos was a nice, portable, easy way to, bam, here's your sacred center. And I in my grove, we always do a creation myth. Not always, but we usually use a creation myth to help us recreate the cosmos. So that actually works really well if you tell the story of the birth of the Olympians, and then with that stone, then you can place the stone right there in your ritual and be like, this is the stone right here. We mark it as the sacred center of the universe. So that's pretty cool.
And then one difference that's the most obvious one to me that neither of them mentioned was our invocation to Hestia at the beginning and end. The most traditional Hellenic thing there is. Every rite, every festival, celebration, Hestia was to be offered to first and last. Hestia, the living flame of the hearth fire or the sacred fire. Which can occasionally get us into trouble when people are pointing out the whole Earth Mother has to be honored first and last according to the court order ritual, which just kind of completely blow off. If you want to report me to the clergy council for that, go ahead, but we always give first and last for Hellenic ritual. Every ADF Hellenic ritual I've been to. Homeric 29 specifically mentions no celebration held by men will not have offerings made to you first and last, so I'll cite that as our reason.
I remember getting into some discussions with I think it was some people from Three Cranes when they started doing Hellenic rites. Sassafras doing some Hellenic stuff, and then they started doing Hellenic stuff, and it was well, where do you put Hestia? Where do you put Hestia? I mean, we throw a wrench into it because we call a Bardic patron. We call a Bardic patron before we call the Earth Mother because we feel like we should want to talk nicely to the Earth Mother too. So we do Bardic patron too. Yeah, we do Bardic patron, Hestia, and then Earth Mother. So maybe we're even more heretical. I don't know.
Well, what we did for Stone Creed, actually, Stone Creed being the Cleveland area grove, what we actually did was we took, in cases where we were able to do this, we actually took a torch out of the social fire, processed in with it, and used that to light the ritual fire as part of the dedication to Hestia, which worked very well. It's for these, sometimes you have to be patient to let the ritual fire light up. It's the usual issue I've gotten complaints about, not the not the fact that we take a little while longer to actually honor.
The practical considerations are important. I think the symbolism here is simply as being the sacred flame that the reason we honor her first and last all the time, other than the fact that the flame is involved in every Hellenic ritual, household, or civic, or whatever, is that Hestia was first and last born of her siblings, the first one born of Rhea, the last one vomited up by Kronos. So she has the first and last thing going with her. That's a pretty important concept in European cultures of being both the first and last at the same time. So when people ask why Hestia is a big deal, that's what I tell them.
So, isn't she also important, Rob, because of her giving up her spot to Dionysus? And she went to
I actually need to track that down. That ancient myth goes all the way back to 1954, I'm afraid.
Really?
A Greek myth. Yeah, that legend is younger than my parents, I'm sorry to say.
Huh. Interesting.
Unfortunately, Hellenic myth is popular enough that, yes, it is not immune to some interesting accumulations. I found some stuff about Orpheus that traced back, as far as I could tell, to the 1960s, and somebody trying to do some, Greek mythology compendium, and I looked for ancient sources, and there weren't any. So, things like that.
I was looking for it, I tried, really, but 54 was the earliest we could get.
Really? Where did you find it?
No, Robert Grames's book of Greek myths. His
okay.
novel. Yeah.
Interesting.
Not really a novel, it's a collection of short stories, but, his book.
Huh.
But it's popular. It seems to have struck a chord with people, certainly. I can't deny it.
Because it makes sense. I mean, because otherwise you have 13 Olympians. It's like if you have the 12 Olympians all around Hestia, then it kind of, now there's a place for everybody, so...
I just find
Hestia... it makes sense.
I just find Hestia... Sorry to interrupt. You guys aren't the only ones who does Hestia before the Earth Mother. Columbia, we just had our Dionysus celebration, so we do Hestia first as well. And what's interesting that Hestia being first is in the Roman hearth culture, Vesta is always last.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting seeing the... now, I read somewhere, and I don't know how accurate this is, and I have to go find that article again, that there might be hints that the Etruscans might have influenced the Greeks with Hestia. Now, this is one article out of I don't know how many, so I don't know, but that's one source that I've read.
It's conceivable they were in contact in southern Italy.
Yeah, the Homeric hints would go back to about 700, 800 BCE. So since that's the earliest reference I see to Hestia being first and last, if the Etruscans were around before then and talked to them, then it's conceivable.
Yeah. But who
I've
knows?
Never heard of that. Who knows?
We're also we always do a deity of the podcast, and actually Hestia is our deity today.
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic.
No, okay.
I love just listening to you guys talk.
Yeah.
You could both bring you kind of the supposed, and it would be nonstop.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all for that as one of the hosts of Wellspring.
Well, another thing that's different too is how you take the omen, and way back when we first started doing Greek rites in my grove, Sassafras in Pittsburgh, we didn't really know what to do. We kind of had a Hellenic tarot deck somebody used. We did a lot of fire scrying, water scrying, which we tend to do when we don't have a better cultural option. And then I also made some cards that just had different deities on them, and pulled them and sort of read from my knowledge of their stories about what the omen might be. And then I learned about, somebody finally brought up on the Hellenic list the Olympian Oracle, also called the Greek Alphabet Oracle, and I was fascinated by that, and it took me a while to finally realize that it was real, that it wasn't something somebody just made up, because I thought it would be awesome, the Celts have their Ogham and the Norse have the runes, where's my runes, and the Olympian Oracle is an actual, oracle that was used in ancient times with the Greek alphabet. Each letter is associated with a keyword, and that keyword is part of a phrase. So a lot of us in ADF have been using the Olympian Oracle for a good many years now. Actually, one of the things we did at the first Hellenic retreat was a lot of us made our own oracle discs. Now you can buy them like the Magical Druid and stuff, but back in the day we had to make them for ourselves. But it's been I think it's been really interesting. Just I use the Olympic Oracle for the Initiate program, through Div 1 and Div 2, and in learning how to read for individuals using it and writing, like creating our own. Some of us have created our own like spreads and things, to read with it, and just talking to other people about the sort of the not only the academic knowledge, but also the sort of shared gnosis that we have come up with as we've worked with it. Talking to other people who work with it, it's been really interesting to see that over the years sort of evolve. And so now we have this simple set that, is our own. And in being in ADF where you have to take an omen for every ritual, it's nice that we have something that is authentic, that we've been working with, that works well in that context. Easier than have a Cirrus sit there and wait to answer your questions, which we have done too, but can be a little more difficult.
The other thing I would just mention is that was actually originally based on throwing dice, or actually bones, knuckle bones, and so that we were actually starting from numeric work in translating that into letters, which would then be translated into beating, but going straight to the letters works beautifully.
Well, I've read that it was either used by dice, or sometimes they were used, they were lot oracles that were, they would draw the letters on pieces of pottery or stones and then pull them out of, either like shake them out of a basket or, pull them out of. So there was a lot of that too. So sometimes they used the knuckle bones, and sometimes they used the actual discs, or, actual not necessarily discs.
Well, then what I'm doing is more authentic than I thought. That's good.
Yeah,
It's a flexible system, and now we have an app for that. Literally, I wrote an Android app that will.
Yes,
you can
I love that app.
Do readings with, and it'll help you learn it.
I use it this morning. Sometimes I do my morning devotion at work at my little work altar, and then if I do that, then I used to use like a random number generator, and then Rob wrote his app, which is fabulous. And then I just do that.
That is awesome. That really just displays the level of varying talent, I think, that we have within ADF, that you wrote an app for that. I think that's really cool.
Yep. And I did an Ohm one too, and the Rune one will probably be out in a couple of hours, actually.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Is that the Elder Futhar?
Yeah, Elder for now. I might do an Anglo-Saxon one separately as well. I'm considering that.
Oh.
The demand has obviously been for the Elder Futhar.
Yeah, of course. That's going to be more. But we've there's also being Hellenic. There's different approaches we can take to the Wheel of the Year as well. And like any of the Hearth cultures, you can look at the actual calendar and see what they were doing at any given time of year. One thing I've found sometimes difficult with doing that personally is that a lot of the festivals, if they're agricultural in nature, they don't necessarily match up with what the weather is doing here in North America, where I live. And a lot of them were sort of state festivals, and they don't necessarily translate all that well. But I'm perfectly fine with, and I don't know if everyone is comfortable doing this, but I am a neo-pagan first. And for me, I celebrate the 8 high days of the Wheel of the Year. And I think that it makes sense to use the themes from those holidays, and then pull from ancient Greek practice and find something, make up something that fits. Like, we've done rituals to Hades and Persephone at Samhain. We've done Aphrodite Beltane. That makes a lot of sense. And of course, we're very honest with, Greeks didn't practice this at this time of year, but we would pull things from the actual ancient practice that did happen and did make sense at that time of year. But other times we've done, just straight up, Eleusinian mysteries or something that does happen at that, the autumn equinox or the spring equinox. So I think there's different ways to approach it, especially, depending on what the needs of your Grove community or, you as an individual are.
And I would add that, so given the urban outlook that the ancients had that we're working with, and the civic holidays that aren't really a concept when you're dealing with Celtic tribes or Norse villages, celebrating modern civic holidays in a Greek way is fine. I make offerings on Election Day before God. I make offerings on the 4th of July. You can work that into your practice as well in the style that the ancients would have done their civic holidays.
Yeah. I should also mention, just getting back to something Everald touched on earlier, one of the things I've always liked about ADF, as opposed to some other organizations, is we are very upfront about, we're making this part up. we're taking our best guess about this thing. And you brought up the Eleusinian Mysteries, which also I find works wonderfully at the equinoxes, and I find it's also very useful for dealing with the people who say the equinoxes don't really matter, nobody does anything really special on the equinoxes. Seriously. Well, actually, here's the thing you can do. But, of course, the Eleusinian Mysteries, they were kept secret very well. Yeah. And so there are parts where we have to say, we are guessing.
Exactly. We've done them in Sassafras 3 times. Once before I became a member, like way in the Dark Ages. Once that I was heavily involved in, and then once I was just a participant, which was really awesome. And we like to refer to them as an inspired interpretation. There are things that we know about what they did, and we're able to pull from that and fill in the blanks. But none of us are going to be saying, yes, we have the authentic mysteries here. Come and be initiated. And I think that's great. Like when we do Aphrodite Beltane, I mean, everything we do with Aphrodite is we honor her in her actual aspects with her actual, epitaphs and in the ways that she would have been honored, but we're offering her a pole as part of our offerings. We make it make sense, but it is a modern interpretation. But it's still, I that's perfectly fine to draw from that. Some people might be less comfortable doing that, but it's something that, as an unabashed neo-pagan, I am perfectly fine with, as long as we're transparent about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Speaking of modern interpretations, we actually, in Columbia Grove, we just had our fall equinox celebration yesterday, and we did a Dionysus celebration with some ecstatic dancing to some David Bowie and CC Factory, Everybody Dance Now.
Oh, yeah.
Seems entirely appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, I have found that Dionysus very much likes goth dance music. And my husband and I keep talking about how we want to have like Dionysus dance party where we want to like go on a bar crawl and and dance for Dionysus. Maybe have some minders, but the rest of us can get really tranced out and drunk, as the case may be. But you don't have to get drunk to experience the Dionysian high. You really don't.
No, but it helps.
It helps.
It helps. Yeah, we've done Dionysus at Autumn Equinox 3 times now. I did it the first time, a while ago, 2006, 2005, something like that. I had this whole idea about, because Dionysus being the god of indestructible life, that when you open yourself up to his power, you're taking that within you, and you are that helps sustain you through the dark time and the dead time of the year. And we open ourselves up through dancing. By dancing, you're breaking down the barriers between human and divine, and you're becoming members of his theosas. You're becoming like the nymphs and the satyrs. And the first time we did it at a Quaker meeting house that is dry. You can't have alcohol there. So it worked okay. And then we had a sacred drinking party afterward that was more like a symposium. The second 2 times we did it, it was more, we were able to drink. And the last time we did it, it turned out it was only people who came. We didn't have anybody from the general public turn up that night, which was very weird. What doesn't usually happen with us. But we had all just Grove members or like close Grove friends come. And we really just let go that night. And people who were drinking grape juice and people who were drinking the fermented stuff both had, amazing experiences just through that ecstatic dancing and trancing. So it's something I highly recommend, working with him in that way. I'd love to see a copy of you guys' ritual. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, I could send it to you. One of our big influence for that ritual was David Bowie. We think that he would be sort of a modernized. I mean, you could probably say better than I can.
Well,
he seems sort of Dionysian to me. Yeah.
Yes. That was our ritual leaders kind of thought was that David Bowie seems like he kind of would be a modern embodiment of Dionysus.
I can see that. That's cool.
Yeah, I will say
I spent all day listening to David Bowie albums, actually, so that's interesting. You brought that up.
Yeah. Light Grove actually did our big Dionysus celebrations always in the spring, which is when drawing on the big Athenian theater festivals and such, because that was their first fruits, and the whole thing was, a 5-day celebration of Dionysus and everything. Oh, yeah. All of the gifts that he could bring. We even could do some ritual plays and things like that to add to the frivolity. And that just it's a powerful tool. It brings everybody together. That's part of, I think, Dionysus's magic. And everybody has a great time, and that's important.
Yeah,
I have a bachelor's in theater, and that's one of the reasons I ended up, I think, being attracted to the Greek pantheon to begin with, is because I met Dionysus in college. When you learn about the history of theater, and when we read the Bacchae, and which just really inspired me. And a lot of the Dionysus stuff that I have written for our autumn equinox celebrations has been either inspired by the Bacchae or directly, I actually take chunks of the Bacchae out and use them. We didn't tear any people up. The first year we did tear up a paper bowl, though, which was kind of cool as our conclusionary sacrifice, which was kind of fun. But, we haven't, torn any rulers apart yet.
What is the Bacchae?
Wandering bards.
Oh, it's a play by Euripides. And it's about basically Dionysus. He's seen it. Not to get too in the weeds of Dionysus, but he was always seen in Greece as sort of this god who arrives. Even though he is actually an ancient god, he's attested in Mycenaean times, but he's sort of seen as this god that is sort of a foreign entity who comes in, and the king of the area where they were, Pentheus, is not happy about this guy and tries to put him in jail and tries to put a stop to the whole new Dionysian cult. And it doesn't really go very well for him because of him trying to not accept Dionysus. He ends up literally being torn apart by Maenads. So,
So I got some questions for you, because I guess we got to start wrapping it up a little bit. Some resources for people who are interested in learning more about the Hellenic Hearth culture so that they could, let's say, practice.
Or just educate themselves.
I'll always start with Walter Burkett's Greek Religion. It is still my go-to book.
Oh, yeah.
Thick.
Absolutely.
It's long. It'll take a while to get through. There's a lot of detail in it. But I still go back and read it and find new things that could kind of sync up with new things I've discovered from my practice, and so that's there too. And it's a good perspective on what we know about what the ancients actually did.
What was the author?
Oh, yeah.
The book is Greek Religion by Walter Burkert, Burkert.
Yeah, that's
I would say theoi.com is my go-to.
Yes.
They have it's an amazing website with all sorts of primary source documents about. It's divided up by god or by being or monster, ancestor. There's however you want to say it. I mean, the kindred in Greek sort of overlap a lot in categories, but everything's there. I mean, it's just broken down with all the different mentions of them and what their cult was about, and epitaphs, and different things that are associated with each god or goddess. I mean, it's such an amazing resource. I mean, and it's got some very just obscure stuff in there too. So if anybody's
I don't know when I go there to look things up. It's every primary source they could get their hands on is in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's awesome.
The other resource, if you're looking at primary sources, I would just mention that's on the web is Perseus, which is at tough.edu, which has almost any of the major primary sources that you can think of in Greek, in English translation. You can do a side-by-side comparison. You can really see the details of every single major source that's being used in trying to understand what these people were thinking. So it's also a good way to just get a sense of what language looks like and might have sounded like. So,
that's my go-to site for looking up Americans. I just go straight there, look at the original, look at the translation, go from there.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's an excellent source. There are some recordings that are out on YouTube if you're looking for what did that music perhaps sound like, because there have been academic researchers that have reconstructed the instruments and gone through what bits and pieces of written Greek music we actually have and performed it. So we've got a sense of all of how it sounds and how the language sounds, and it's just trying to bring that into the modern age.
I really liked Greek Nymphs by Jennifer Larson. The Greek Nymphs, Myth, Cult, and Lore. Especially since we work with, the Three Kindred in ADF. I mean, it's a book essentially about the Greek nature spirits. And for me, I mean, I have this theory that people in ADF tend to either have the one kindred they're really, really attached to and close with and easily connect to, and the one that they have a hard time with, and the one that's sort of easy. And for me, I had a hard time with the worldly spirits, and because I'm a deities person, like all the way. So it really helped me able to connect with them in my hearth culture. Actually, was really helpful, and to see how the ancients honored the worldly spirits, and how understood them actually helped me to better understand the spirits in my own, own life, in my own yard, in my own world. So that book I thought was really amazing, especially for somebody in ADF looking to work with the nature spirits.
Another resource probably worth mentioning is Religion in the Ancient Greek City.
It's
a whole long list of our authors.
Okay, I'll continue. More so than when you read Walter Burkert, you get a lot of the fine details about everything. But when I read Simon and Pantel, that gave me a better feel for what in the life of an ancient Greek city-state would look like from a religious perspective. What it's like to get ready for the civic holidays, to do the birth rituals. It's more of like an on-the-ground field reporter kind of look at it as opposed to an academic study. So I found it fascinating in that regard.
Yeah. And there is, of course, also the primary sources.
Real fast, can you send me the name for that? Because I'm not quite catching what you're saying there, Rob.
Okay, I'll fire that along with the Labras video link.
Appreciate it.
Okay. I'll send it over.
All right, do you guys have any last thoughts?
I'm sorry. The ADF Hellenic Kin site has definitely has ritual.
ADF Hellenic get to it. We're still working.
Hey, Emerald, can we start that again? Because I totally interrupted you. I apologize.
The ADF Kin site, if you're a Hellenic Kin site, if you're an ADF member, has a lot of rituals and some prayers and some other resources. Probably not as many as we would like, but we'll get there.
We're always
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was just about to ask good ADF specific resources for our ADF listeners.
That's one. That's one right there.
I know Jana Vende, Reverend Jana Vende from Columbus. I don't know if she's finished it or she's in the process of writing it. A book on the Olympian Oracle.
She's still writing it. Yeah.
She's still writing it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that coming out.
And John Opsapos, who wrote the one 20 years ago and put it online, has a book with Llewellyn that he's going to be coming out. This is not necessarily good news for me because I may not be able to hold the copyright on my app when that happens. It depends on what kind of contract he signs with Llewellyn. It just means I have to get a different translation and use that instead. We'll figure it out.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That is, I think that's probably a good start for people to be checking things out. Do you have any any final thoughts to wrap things up for us?
Charis, Kharis. So that's not how it's spelled in Greek letters, obviously, but it's roughly the equivalent of reciprocity, of the giving and receiving of energy and blessings and such from the gods and spirits. If you're a Dungeons and Dragons player, that's where the word charisma comes from. So now you learn something there too. When we talk about Greek practice, the charis and the giving and receiving is how we describe that. So it's a good word to know if you're an ADF Hellenic practitioner.
Absolutely. I think I would just say that, it's important to remember that ADF is a pan-Indo-European organization, and that the Greek is just as Indo-European as the rest of it, and it fits very well into our ritual structure. And, go nuts. Figure out how it works for you.
My basic final thought is the Greeks left us an excellent legacy of art and music and poetry and writings of all kinds. Take advantage of that. This is pagans writing for other pagans in a window that we don't have in most other hearth cultures.
Well, one of the Norse members of my grove complained to me because he finally wrote a paper about Greek stuff. He did some research. He came to me and said, "You have so much written stuff. Do you know how hard I have to work to write a paper on Norse things?" And then I looked at you, and you've got books and books of things to work with. That's one of the good things about being Hellene.
It's also one of the terrifying things, because you find out that somebody has written something that you hadn't noticed about because you're only on volume 17.
Yeah.
But yes, it's.
I enjoy actually, being able to use the actual ancient prayers and, like the Homeric hymns or the Orphic hymns. I enjoy using those, written by the ancients. We don't have a lot of that. Maybe the Vedas we have, but we don't have a lot of that in some of the other hearth cultures, and even the plays too. Don't overlook the plays. There's a lot to be found in the plays, and the comedies.
So to wrap things up, do we have are any of you open to, how shall I phrase this? Do you have any public websites or any way that you'd be open to people contacting you if they'd be interested?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I'm on
people
Facebook.
Can email me.
Email personally.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I do have a blog, even though my blog's writing's been mostly about runes as of late.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook as well. I also have a blog, and I'd be happy to give my email address. So send you that stuff.
All right. Well, then we will make sure to have that information in the show notes for our listeners. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the three of you for taking the time out of your day today to come talk to us. I know you're really missing that presidential debate right now, but
I'm sure I'll see enough clips on Colbert Late Show or something.
Anything important I'll see there.
But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom, and I look forward to maybe talking to you guys again sometime for one of our future episodes.
Okay, thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for having us.
TV screen. It's a window bright and clean. Another wife swapped. What does it all mean? Elder brother, you're never wrong. Sure, we people acting strong. So I look outside to see the green. Do you dream of drinking from the grail, that the truth is held within a tale, and Arthur sleeps now, ready to return? Do you know that Jack lives in the green? Morris dances on the green. It's just a bit of fun to pass the days. But there is magic in their dance. The season's blessed not by chance, and I raise my glass to pagan ways. Do you dream of drinking from the grail, that the truth is held within a tale, and Arthur sleeps now, ready to return? Do you know that Jack lives in the green, that things are never as they seem, and life is more than the money that you earn? Do you dream of drinking from the grail, that the truth is held within a tale, and Arthur sleeps now, ready to return?
Sacred Gifts, Reciprocity in the Gods. This book is all about reciprocity, the give and take of life, and how the religions of the ancient world relied upon this gift exchange to even exist. Just as people give to each other in life, so may we give to the gods and spirits, expecting blessings in return. This timeless way of looking at our dealings with the gods mirrors how our own society holds together even today. We give love and aid to our friends and family, and they return the favor. And we can give love and aid to the spirits so that they can return the favor to us. I give so that you may give. We give so that they may give. Reciprocity, an important concept in paganism. Sacred Gifts, Reciprocity in the Gods is available on Amazon.com.
Hi, I'm Reverend Melissa Birchfield, and you're listening to Part the Mist, a Druid podcast created and hosted by the members of Columbia ADF.
We hope you enjoyed the discussion with those fine folks. And now to our interview with Missy Birchfield, who recently just got married, so now she's Missy Ashton. Enjoy.
Hey folks, I am here with Reverend Melissa Birchfield, better known as Missy. She's the current ADF Bard Laureate. And we're just gonna go ahead and get you talking about yourself here. One of the best ways I found to kind of get to know a little bit about people is how did you come to paganism? And follow-up question, how did you find ADF?
So I actually grew up in a household that was pretty agnostic. I mean, my mom taught me a little bit about Christianity here and there, but for the most part, we didn't have much religion in the home. When I was 16, I converted to Catholicism by choice, and I eventually ended up leaving the church because it turned out I was a polytheist. We have a whole pantheon in the Christian faith from my perspective. You know, we had a god, we had a demigod, we had several goddesses, and a whole array of saints.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Spirit was the Roman Hagia Sophia, who's the goddess of wisdom. And I found all of these things, and it became a bad fit for me because they wanted me to have one God, and I had many relationships with many different beings. Yeah. So when I left the church, I was seeking for a while. I found Wicca. My roommate in college was Wiccan, and so we practiced that for a while. And then in 2009, after being a solitary for a couple of years, I decided that I was tired of praying alone. And I was actually looking for a coven, and instead I found a grove. So as a shameless plug, please put a web page out. I found ADF through Three Cranes Grove, which is local to where I was living at the time in Columbus, Ohio.
We'll find that web page, and it will be in the show notes, folks. So you found Three Cranes Grove, and you fell in love, I assume.
I did. I went to the ADF website first. Okay. I had intended originally to be a solitary, haha. Because I was practicing at home. My youngest son has autism. He's had a pretty strong disability at the time. wasn't verbal. And I was afraid he'd be disruptive, and I didn't want to disrupt things, because a lot of the practices I had done before were very meditative, very trancy, and not conducive to children. So I was looking to be a solitary, and I was trying to see how this whole core order thing worked. And so I actually went to a Three Cranes event. It was actually Beltane. I went there to see the core order in action. They were open, they were kind, they were very friendly, they had other children there, and the children were not an afterthought, they were actually part of what we were doing, and it was an amazing space, and I have attended every possible ritual I can for every high day and beyond since then.
Excellent. So how did you start getting more involved? Well, let's start with your dedicant path and your how did you decide to follow the dedicant path, and how did you decide to follow clergyship?
This is a long story. Well, I started with the dedicant path because I was primarily Wiccan, and I wanted to know what the difference between Wicca and Druidry were about. There was an article on the ADF site about the differences between Wicca and Druidry. That was a good start, but I wanted to know more about that. Michael Dangler was the priest of our grove, and he's the one who wrote the Dedicant Path Through the Wheel of the Year.
Yes, we use his book for our group.
Yeah, it's a great book. There's more in it than you need to do the actual Dedicant program documentation, but man, it really helps you with your own internal processes, your own spiritual growth, and building your own internal path and creating a devotional practice for yourself. I found it to be very, very useful. I learn well from writing prompts. And I looked at the Dedicant Path material, because they send you a book when you sign up for ADF, and was like, man, this looks fantastic. This is what I need as a study program, so I can learn how to be a functional person in this faith path and see if it's the right one for me. Working through the Dedicant Path was very rewarding. Made a lot of friends, met a lot of people. There's a lot of groves in that area. I've been to Sassafras, I've been to Stone Creek, and up into Michigan and all sorts of places.
And for the listeners, where is Three Crane Grove?
Three Cranes Grove is in Columbus, Ohio, kind of in the Heartland region, in the middle of the Heartland region. There are a lot of pagans in that area. It's a very rich area.
That's actually where a lot of our ADF events happen, isn't it? Yes.
Yes. It's a great space, lots of fellowship. It's a beautiful community. It really is. And so I finished my Dedicant Path. I actually finished it was about 8 months, and I had to wait another month for the last high day to happen so I could attend it and write it up. By then I had already finished Liturgy 1 and had all that turned in because I set my sights on the Bardic Guild Study Program right away. I've been a musician for a very long time. Used to sing in bars. There's evidence on YouTube. Be kind. It's fine. And I wanted to bring some of the practices I had found in the Christian path I was on before of religious music into my new practice because music is very, very important to me as a musician and a devotional polytheist. I like to write songs that put me in that worshipful headspace and can be a gift to the gods and not just me singing a song. So I started right away as soon as I finished the DP to go into the Bardic Guild Study Program. During that process, I went into the initiate work, and I am most of the way done with it, but about halfway through, and after I finished Master Bard, I realized that I'm not necessarily a mage. I'm not one who is drawn to the mystical sides. I'm drawn to the people. I'm drawn to service, and during that time, it hit me that I think the clergy training program was a better place for me because the skill sets that I have to offer and the drive that I have and motivation I feel, it matches better with the type of service that is involved with clergy work. So I also finished the first circle of the Liturgist Guild because ritual is very important to me, and that all fits very well in what an ADF priest in general looks like.
And we've mentioned before on the podcast, I believe, but in case the listeners are curious, the initiatory path and the clergy path actually kind of start along the same lines.
Yes.
So therefore, it would be pretty easy to be along that initiatory path and just kind of in the middle of it be like, you know what, I'm going to go down clergy instead.
Well, there's an article on the ADF website, I think Michael Dangler wrote that one as well, that talks about the difference between being an initiate and being a clergy member. And I had several conversations with him in person, and he's also accessible via email. He's a fantastic resource, and he helped me talk through a lot of it. And I took some omens, did a lot of prayer and meditation, and clergy was that's where I felt more more like I could make a difference.
Yes.
And I could help other people get the things that I wanted out of ADF, that I found, to help make that a continual process and to give back to the people because of the things that they had given to me.
Can you talk a little bit more about the bardic path?
The bardic path.
Your bardic path.
Well, like I said, I've been a musician for a long time. I actually sang in a couple of Christian worship bands before I left the Christian faith. It was hard for me to leave because the music was so important to me. I still sing a lot of my devotionals. I do a lot of practices with that. I do a lot of meditations through just guitar strumming.
If I can interrupt you for a moment, we also have Phaedra Bonowitz here at the Beyond the Gates event, which is where we're recording this interview, by the way. Last night we had a bardic circle, and Phaedra started singing this song that was a filk from a Christian hymn that was one of my parents' favorite hymn, and listening to her sing it with Isaac Bonowitz's words, no less, I was tearing up and laughing at the same time because I had that connection. But it was Isaac Bonowitz, and he was a wonderful and somewhat blasphemous at times. Man.
He had a beautiful spirituality and was slightly irreverent.
Yes.
But he was a lot of fun, and a lot of the things that he has left behind because of that are memorable.
Yes.
And they have made a difference in the path of many people, including me. Isaac was very much a bard as well, and that I had the privilege of meeting him before he passed, and we competed against one another in the first ever Wellspring Bardic Chair.
Okay.
I won the second one, but not the first one. So I started with music right away. Started trying to fold it in. I had written a couple of other pieces before then. It was actually Reverend James Seamus Dillard who encouraged me, along with Michael Dangler, to share music. Music was something that I wasn't sure would be welcome in a pagan space because I hadn't met a lot of devotional polytheists before I came to ADF. And as someone who writes music for praise and for offering and for those types of awe-inspiring, worshipful moments, I wasn't sure I would fit in. And they encouraged me, it's your path. If you want to offer a song and you bring your guitar up and stand in front of the fire, and if that's your offering, that's your offering. And they provided safe space for that to be a legitimate part of my path. And without their support, I don't think I would have gone as far as I have. But they helped me to recognize that's who I am, and that's okay. For a while, I struggled with am I a bard or am I a priest? Am I going to be a bard or am I going to go into service? And at some point, it was like, hey, dummy, you can do both. It's a both and, not an either or. And that actually was one of the other things that led me into further work and to pursue the clergy credentials. But circling back around, I like I said, I finished Liturgy 1 so I could start the Bardic study program as soon as I finished my DP. Got all the way through to Master Bard. It is 18 circles of work, 6 third circles. It was a monster worth of work to do. All of it was fantastic. I have become such a better writer. It's been phenomenal. I also created the Order of Bardic Alchemy, which is an order that's specifically designed to look at the place where Bardic arts and music overlap with magic. Because being a bard is not just about composing, it's not just about performing. Being a bard is about using those tools in ritual space. And so we have an order now that is designed to help us to explore where that overlap lies and how we can use that to serve the folk.
So in your workshop yesterday, you had like the toning and the Awen, and so that's the Bardic Alchemy then.
Yes,
okay.
Using Bardic arts for magic. So, specifically, that workshop was designed to be about sound, but you can also use poetic, and poetic verse is useful because that has a cadence to it, and that's something that can be used for trance induction. Stories and poems are also good. They give you an outlet to describe in great detail, the gods, the stories of the gods, what the gods mean to you, stories about your ancestors. Those pieces help us connect with our paths in ways that aren't possible with just invocations. You take an invocation, you turn it into a story. You take an invocation, you turn it into a poem. There's a line where they overlap, and in that space is where you learn and you can start making connections to beings that you've not met before.
So it sounds like the Guild of Bardic Alchemy is something that I mean, I've been writing articles about, the magic that is created by the bards within ritual space just by having us chanting or singing the portal song or singing the invocation to Columbia within our rituals. It sounds like the Guild of Bardic Alchemy might be something that I might find some more interest, some interest in, some more area of focus.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's an order. It's actually an order which is separate.
Sorry.
That's fine. This is actually really good because there's a difference. The Bardic Guild is one study program, and then the order is a supplemental program. You actually do both together.
Okay.
They're designed to be complementary so that because the Bardic Guild program teaches you a lot about writing and performing and how to be in that space as a bard, and then the order helps you take those skills and translate them into actual ritual space. And they go very well hand in hand, which is why when we wrote the study program, we made it so that as you finished circles in the Bardic Guild study program, you were then eligible for later levels in the order, because they all go hand in hand to make one holistic training. To go back to what you had said about the articles you were writing, I think that you hit it spot on. Bardic arts, singing, and those types of things, they're unifying. Those are one of the things that you can do with other people. When we all were upstairs at the Bardic Circle last night and we all knew the words to the song, at least the catch to the song that Phaedra was singing, even though part of it was filmed, we all were singing together and we were all engaged, and it was this beautiful moment of community because we were unified by that song.
Yes.
And that's the spirit of what we want these Bardic arts to bring to our rituals.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I am absolutely there with you. So can you give us a little bit now on? So you've been member advocate with ADF. You are currently Bard Laureate. Can you give us maybe a little bit of information about how you got involved with
the administrative side of
things?
Yes. I was friends with Art Shipkowski, who was the members advocate before I ran for office. And we had a conversation at one point where he was talking about how rewarding that work had done. Some of it's very hard. The members advocate, for those who don't know, is the ombudsperson between the folk and the Mother Grove. They are also the person that approves all of handles all of the compassionate memberships. Point of contact when someone has questions or needs help with something. So you end up triaging a lot of people's requests for information to the people that they need to talk to. So there's a ton of networking. We send out welcome letters to new members so that they have an idea of what types of resources are available to them on the members side of the website. And you end up talking to a lot of beautiful people. There is a lot of people hear about the complaint process, and that's who you talk to when you're mad about something. That's only part of the job, and the rest of the job had to do with actually making connections for people and helping them to find the tools they needed to enrich their own spiritual paths. And it was a great opportunity. I did all 3 years. That's just the maximum number of terms you can do. 1 year term. 1 year is a lot. 1 year. The reason that the terms are for 1 year is because the members advocate is probably one of the most difficult jobs to hold in ADF. I'm a different person now because of the work that I did as a members advocate. I mean, I learned so much about myself. It was very humbling. It was a great opportunity.
And what does the Bard Laureate do?
So the role of the Bard Laureate is one that Skip Ellison, when he was Archdruid, created. The Bard Laureate is an honorary position that is given to someone to represent the spirit of bardic arts within ADF. Not only at ADF events, but also at community events and other pan-pagan events, to try to show them what types of things outside of our core order ritual we have to offer to the pagan community. So I'm very excited about where that's going to take me and how I can help people get that side of what it is that we do in our own druidry.
I mean, speaking on a personal level, I think you're doing a fantastic job so far.
Thank you. That means a lot.
For the listeners, you guys know that I am Bardic leader for Columbia Grove, and Missy has helped open up a whole new world for me in a lot of ways. I've been doing a lot. Our bards have been doing a lot of the same old chants with the same old stuff, and just on the first night, Missy, we were singing one of the same old chants, and she starts singing other words and other tunes, and I was very happy. I immediately professed my love, and
that was actually a very beautiful moment for me. I think the two greatest things that you can do to show appreciation to a bard is to tell them that they're doing a great job, to tell them you appreciate something, and to learn the words to the songs that they have written. Those are the two most amazing things and most rewarding things that you can give to someone who's in bardic service. So thank you for sharing that with me. And as an aside, if you had not built such a strong foundation with your bardic group, we wouldn't have been able to learn that song last night. So you guys are doing a fantastic job. And I think that what's happening right now is that you're ready for the next layer of things. So I know that when you get to the point where you're tired of your songs, that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. That means you finished that part and you're ready for the next thing. That is your experience telling you you're ready to move on. And I think that you guys are ready. You guys have an amazing group. I was very impressed with the words and the vocal quality of what you guys do.
Thank you so much. I'm going to make sure that they listen to this episode so they hear those words. Is there anything else that you would like to let us know about?
I've been with ADF since 2009, and I have, as someone who has gone through the clergy training program, I am now oath-bound to serve the folk, the gods, and the land, and I have never been more proud to be a member of ADF and to be at this level of service, because it gives me the ability to come to things like this and to meet people like you guys and to just have those moments, and I will always treasure those. So anybody who's considering getting more involved with ADF or with other areas of interest in the pagan community in your own areas, I encourage you to do so.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to be on the show, and a wonderful interview and lots of wonderful information. And who knows, folks, maybe we'll be able to get her on the show again in the future.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to both these discussions. They were fantastic discussions we had with these fine folks, and we'd love to bring them on to the show again. Since Arin's not here today, and he's usually really good at doing the events calendar, all the events will be posted in our show notes, so if you're interested in anything going on in the Pacific Northwest, please take a look at those. Again, we'd like to thank everybody who came on the show to share their views and opinions about both the Hearth culture and our interview with Missy. Those were both fantastic. So if you'd like to get a hold of us, our email is ptmpod@gmail.com. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also find our fan page and discussion group on Facebook if you search Part the Mist Podcast. Before we wrap everything up, let's go ahead and thank Hestia. Hestia, goddess of the flame, thank you for bringing us all together this day for such a fantastic podcast. Hestia, we thank you.
Wise one,
Brave one,
show us,
strong one, we bid you now hail and farewell. Go by the powers that brought you, go by the unweaving spell. As thy bright pentagrams fade, depart ere the circle is gone.
winged one,
Fierce one,
swift one,
hooved one, as we say.